Racist teens bully a black classmate, not knowing he's their substitute teacher the next day. The students' laughter echoed in the hallway, but it wasn't because of anything funny. It was directed at him, Jamal. As he walked into the classroom the next morning, his heart raced. There they were again, the same group of teens who made his life miserable every day. They didn't know he was the substitute teacher today, and that made it all the sweeter. Jamal stood at the front of the room, his hand gripping the teacher's desk as he locked eyes with the group. He had a plan, and he was going to make them regret everything they had said about him. Just yesterday, they had thrown a whole list of racist insults at him, mocking the way he looked and the color of his skin. One of the boys had even dared to ask, "Why don't you go back to Africa?" followed by a chuckle from the others. Jamal had never felt more humiliated in his life. But now, as the substitute teacher for the day, things were about to change. The bell rang, and the students began filling the room. Jamal watched them closely. There was Noah, the leader of the group, who had called him all sorts of ugly names. Then there was Ava, always smiling as she joined in on the teasing, followed by Luke and Caitlin, who laughed along, not caring that their words could hurt someone. They took their seats, unaware that the person they had mocked the most was now in charge. Jamal took a deep breath. The moment was coming. He smiled to himself. "All right, class, let's get started," he said, his voice calm and steady. They all turned to look at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. They didn't recognize him at first, and Jamal made sure it stayed that way. He began handing out worksheets and taking attendance, pretending to be just like any other substitute teacher. But as soon as he called Noah's name, the realization hit. Noah's face paled, his eyes widening in shock. He looked at Jamal, then back at the others, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The others were staring too, slowly putting two and two together. "Why, you're that kid from yesterday." Noah finally stammered. His voice trembled with disbelief. Jamal's smile grew wider. "Yes, I am," he replied simply. The tension in the room thickened. He could hear a faint gasp from Ava, and Caitlin shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Luke remained frozen, unsure of what to say. But Noah wasn't going to back down. You can't be serious. "You're just a kid," he sneered, trying to save face, but his voice betrayed him. Jamal leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "I'm not a kid," he said, his voice low but firm. "And you've been treating me like one, haven't you?" The room was dead silent now, everyone watching, waiting for the next move. Jamal could almost feel their discomfort, but he wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. He had waited for this moment far too long. Just as he was about to speak again, the door swung open, and the principal walked in. "Is everything all right here, Mr. Jamal?" she asked, her tone kind but slightly confused. Noah quickly stood up, his face flushing. "You can't let him teach us. He's not even a real teacher," he protested. Jamal didn't flinch. "Actually, Noah, I am a real teacher," he said coolly, giving the group one last look before turning to the principal. "But it seems I've got their attention now. I'll handle this, don't worry." The principal glanced at him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "All right, if you're sure," she said, giving a quick nod before stepping out of the room. With that, the door shut behind her, and Jamal turned back to the class. His eyes scanned the room one more time, locking eyes with each of the students who had once mocked him. For a moment, no one said anything. But then, in a small voice, Noah spoke up again. You can't just get away with this. We didn't mean it, okay?" Jamal raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mean it? You really think that's going to fix anything?" Noah shuffled his feet, his face now full of regret. But it was too late for apologies now. Jamal held their gaze for a moment longer before slowly turning to the chalkboard and starting the lesson. He knew the power was in his hands now. And as the students reluctantly started paying attention, Jamal's heart settled into a calm rhythm. But he wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. And just as the first bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Jamal knew it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The bell rang, signaling the end of the lesson. Jamal stood at the front of the class, watching as the students began to file out one by one, their eyes still filled with uncertainty. Noah, Ava, Luke, and Caitlin hesitated before they left. They exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do next. Jamal's heart raced. He knew that what had just happened wasn't enough to teach them a real lesson. They needed to understand the weight of their words, the impact of their actions. He couldn't let them walk away thinking they could just apologize and everything would be fine. As Noah passed by him, he shot a quick, nervous glance at Jamal. "You're still not going to tell anyone, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jamal stood still, watching him. "Tell anyone what?" Noah shifted his weight uncomfortably. "About yesterday, about how we made fun of you." Jamal didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to tell Noah that his words meant nothing, that he didn't owe him anything, but instead, he simply nodded. "No promises," Jamal finally said, his voice steady. "But you know what? You don't need to worry about that. You need to worry about how you treat people, not how to cover up your mistakes." Noah's eyes widened, and he quickly turned away, his shoulders slumped. The others followed him out of the room without saying another word. Jamal watched them go, a sense of triumph rising within him. He had done what he set out to do, but this wasn't over. Not yet. The rest of the day passed slowly, the weight of the morning still hanging over Jamal. He sat at his desk after the final bell rang, the classroom empty, staring at the pile of lesson plans in front of him. His mind kept returning to the same question: how could he make them understand? He had grown up hearing about racism and learning about its impact on others, but it had always been from a distance. It wasn't until that moment when he was standing in front of those teens that he realized how much he could make a difference. He had the power to teach them, not just the lesson on the board, but the real lesson that mattered. Suddenly, the door opened again. Jamal looked up to see Luke standing there, looking nervous. "Can I talk to you?" Luke asked, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Jamal raised an eyebrow but gestured for Luke to come in. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Luke shuffled his feet awkwardly, not meeting Jamal's eyes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About everything. Yesterday, it wasn't right. And I guess I didn't really think about it before." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. "You're sorry?" Luke nodded, his face flushed. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I guess I just went along with it because everyone else did. But that's not an excuse." Jamal stood up slowly, studying Luke. It was clear he was sincere, but Jamal couldn't just let him off the hook so easily. "You know, it's not about being sorry now," Jamal said. "It's about making sure you never do that to anyone again. People's words, they can hurt more than anything physical. And when you say things like that, it's not just a joke. It's real. Do you get that?" Luke nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, I get it now. I really do." Jamal studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "Good. But you can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. You need to show you've learned something from this. You need to be better." Luke's face softened, and for a moment, he almost looked like a different person. "I will. I promise." As Luke left the room, Jamal sat back down at his desk, a sense of satisfaction settling in. One down, but how many more were there to change? How many more needed to understand the impact of their actions? He glanced at the clock. It was almost time to go home, but his thoughts were still swirling. Tomorrow, he would be back. Tomorrow, he would have another chance to make a difference. But as he packed up his things, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger waiting for him. Something more. Jamal wasn't sure what, but he had a feeling the story wasn't over yet. Just as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the principal. "Mr. Jamal, I need to speak with you tomorrow morning before school. Something has come up." Jamal's stomach tightened. What could it be? Why did he have the sense that something was about to hit him out of nowhere? He locked the classroom door behind him and left the building, but the thought of what might be waiting for him kept him up that night. Tomorrow, things were going to change again, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. When the sun rose the next morning, Jamal made his way to school early. As he walked through the familiar halls, he wondered what the principal wanted to discuss. Was it about yesterday? About the lesson he'd taught? He reached the principal's office and knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice called. He opened the door and stepped inside. The principal was sitting at her desk, looking serious. "Mr. Jamal, thank you for coming," she said, motioning for him to take a seat. Jamal sat down, waiting for her to speak. Her expression softened as she looked at him. "I just wanted to say that I've been hearing some reports from the students, and I have to say, I'm impressed with how you handled yourself yesterday. You really taught them something they needed to learn." Jamal relaxed slightly, but didn't say anything. He could tell she wasn't finished. But, she continued, there's something else I need to bring up. It's about Noah. Jamal's eyes narrowed. What about Noah? The principal paused, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Well, it turns out his parents aren't happy with how things went yesterday. They've been in contact with the school board. Jamal's heart sank. What do they want? She hesitated. They're requesting that you not be allowed to substitute teach here again. They believe that you're not the right person for the job. Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was this really happening? Was Noah's family trying to make things worse after everything? Are they serious? He asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. The principal nodded. They are. And the school board is going to meet to discuss it. I need to know where you stand on this. Jamal's mind was spinning. This was worse than he thought. The fight he had started was far from over. But now, it wasn't just about the students. It was about a fight that could affect his future. And it was only just beginning. Jamal sat in the principal's office, his mind racing. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. He couldn't believe it. Noah's parents were trying to get him fired over something that was, in his mind, long overdue. Jamal had stepped up, stood his ground, and tried to make things right. But now, it seemed like the consequences were going to come crashing down on him. I understand this is a lot to process, the principal said, her voice steady but full of sympathy. But I need you to be prepared. The school board will meet tomorrow, and they'll decide what happens next. I'll support you in any way I can, but I can't promise anything. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. What are they accusing me of? What exactly did I do wrong? The principal shifted uncomfortably in her seat. They're saying you overstepped your role as a substitute teacher. They believe that your personal history with the students should not have interfered with your professional duties. They're also claiming that your actions could have led to further tension among the students. Jamal felt his chest tighten. So they're mad because I made the kids face the truth? They don't care about how their actions affected me, or how it might have affected others. This is about protecting their precious little boy, isn't it? The principal didn't answer right away. She simply gave him a sad, understanding look. It's complicated. The parents want to protect their son. I can't blame them for that, but I also understand your side of things. You did the right thing by teaching them a lesson, but not everyone sees it that way. Jamal rubbed his temples, frustration building. He had tried to make a difference, but now it felt like everything was falling apart. Was he going to lose his chance to be a teacher over something like this? Do you think they'll actually fire me? He asked, his voice shaky. The principal hesitated before answering. I don't know. It's hard to say what the board will decide. They might be swayed by Noah's family, or they might side with you. Either way, I want you to know that you have my support. I'll be there tomorrow to make sure your side is heard. Jamal nodded, grateful for her support, but it didn't feel like enough. He was standing at a crossroads. His future as a teacher, his chance to make a difference in these kids' lives, was now in the hands of a school board. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was determined to fight for what was right. That evening, as Jamal sat at home, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He replayed the events of the past few days in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. The insults, the confrontation in class, the apology from Luke, none of it seemed to matter now. It was as though none of it had made a difference. Jamal thought about his family, the people who had supported him throughout his life. They'd always told him that he had to be strong, that he couldn't let others define who he was. But now, it felt like the world was trying to break him. At the same time though, Jamal knew he couldn't give up. He couldn't let this moment define him. If he backed down now, what would that teach the students? What would it say about the world they were growing up in? The next morning, Jamal arrived at school early, his heart pounding in his chest. The principal had asked him to meet her before the school board's meeting, so he made his way to her office with a mix of anxiety and determination. When he entered the office, the principal was sitting at her desk, holding a folder with papers spread out in front of her. Mr. Jamal, she greeted him, I'm glad you could make it. The meeting is about to start. I just wanted to go over a few things before we go in. Jamal nodded, trying to steady his breathing. What do you need me to do? The principal looked up at him with a serious expression. I need you to stay calm, no matter what happens. I'll be there to support you, but you'll have to speak up for yourself. The board will be listening carefully, And you need to present your side clearly. Jamal took a deep breath. I understand. They walked together down the hallway to the boardroom, where a group of school board members were already seated around a large table. Jamal could feel the tension in the air as he took a seat at the table, across from the board members and the principal. The meeting began with the chairperson of the board, a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair, addressing the room. We're here today to discuss the incident that took place in Mr. Jamal's classroom yesterday. We've heard reports from the students, their parents, and the staff. Now it's time to hear from Mr. Jamal. Jamal's heart raced as he stood up to speak. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, he began, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. I want to make it clear that my actions were never meant to hurt anyone. When I became a substitute teacher, I did so because I believed in the power of education, in the ability of teachers to shape young minds. I believe that it's important for students to learn not just from textbooks, but from life itself. And sometimes, that means teaching hard lessons. He paused, looking around the room at the board members. What happened in my class yesterday wasn't something I took lightly. The students who mocked me, who insulted me, needed to be held accountable. Racism is a serious issue, and when I saw it happening right in front of me, I knew I couldn't just ignore it. Jamal could see the board members exchanging glances, some of them nodding while others looked skeptical. The chairperson raised her hand, signaling that she wanted to ask a question. Mr. Jamal, we understand that you felt it was important to address the students' behavior, she said, her voice cool. But some of the reports we've received suggest that you may have overstepped your role as a substitute teacher. Do you think your personal feelings got in the way of your professional responsibilities? Jamal hesitated, then spoke with conviction. No, I don't. I believe that as an educator, my responsibility goes beyond teaching the curriculum. I have a duty to teach these students about respect, empathy, and understanding. And if that means challenging their behavior when it's wrong, then that's exactly what I'll do. There was a moment of silence in the room as the board members absorbed his words. Then, the chairperson nodded. Thank you, Mr. Jamal. We will take your statement into consideration. We will reconvene after a brief discussion. Jamal sat back down, trying to steady his racing heart. He knew he had said what needed to be said, but now it was out of his hands. The waiting felt unbearable. His future was now in the hands of the school board, and all he could do was hope they saw things from his perspective. As the board members discussed in hushed voices, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He had made his case, but was it enough? Would the board members side with him, or would Noah's family win this fight? And then, just as he thought the tension couldn't get any worse, the door opened, and a new figure stepped inside. It was Noah's mother, her expression stern and determined. I have something I'd like to add, she said, her voice cutting through the room. Jamal's stomach dropped. This wasn't over. It was about to get much worse. Noah's mother stepped into the room, her eyes locked on Jamal. Her presence sent a ripple of discomfort through the room, and the board members shifted in their seats. Jamal felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known that this would get worse, but he hadn't expected her to walk in here like this, so sure of herself, so ready to fight. She didn't wait for an invitation. I'm here because I want to make sure that the truth is heard, Noah's mother said, her voice cutting through the tense air. She glanced at Jamal, her gaze cold. My son has been through enough. He should not have been subjected to the behavior of a man who clearly has an agenda. Jamal's jaw clenched at her words. The insinuation stung. He had been accused of overstepping his role, of letting personal emotions influence his teaching. But her words seemed to imply that he was the villain, that he was the one who had caused all this. I understand your concern, the chairperson of the board said, holding up a hand. But we are here to discuss the incident, not personal matters. Please keep your comments to the point. Noah's mother nodded, though her eyes never left Jamal. My son was just a child. He made a mistake, yes, but that's what kids do. They mess up. It's not fair to treat him like he's the problem here. Mr. Jamal's actions in the classroom were unprofessional. He humiliated my son in front of his peers. Jamal could feel his blood boiling. Humiliated, he repeated, his voice rising. Your son insulted me. He mocked me, made fun of my skin color. And I'm the one being unprofessional. The room fell silent, all eyes on Jamal. The chairperson cleared her throat. Mr. Jamal, please. Let's keep things civil. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to rein in his frustration. I'm sorry, but I can't sit here and pretend that what happened yesterday was just some harmless mistake. Noah and his friends crossed a line. They needed to understand that their words have consequences. Noah's mother's eyes flashed with anger. You're just using this as an excuse to punish my son. He's a good kid, and you've turned this into something it's not. I didn't turn anything into anything, Jamal snapped back. This is about respect, and that's something your son and his friends need to learn. If they can't understand that words matter, then they're never going to change. Noah's mother's face turned red, and for a moment, Jamal thought she might yell at him. But instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. Fine. But don't think you can just walk in here and accuse my son of things he didn't mean. You're the one causing trouble. Before Jamal could respond, the board chairperson held up her hand again. Enough. Let's proceed. We've heard both sides now. Mr. Jamal, thank you for your statements. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for your input. The board will take a few minutes to discuss. As the room fell into tense silence, Jamal sat back in his chair, trying to steady his thoughts. This was his moment of truth. The school board had the power to decide his fate, and he had no idea how they were going to vote. Minutes felt like hours. The murmurs from the board members grew quieter as they deliberated, their faces unreadable. Jamal kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, trying to focus on his breathing, trying to calm himself. Finally, the chairperson spoke up. We've reached a decision. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. His palms were sweaty. He glanced up to see the board members looking at him with varying expressions, some sympathetic, some skeptical, and some unsure. We've decided that Mr. Jamal will be allowed to continue as a substitute teacher for the remainder of the semester, the chairperson announced, her voice firm but not unkind. However, there will be conditions. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Conditions? What did that mean? The board feels that the situation in your classroom could have been handled differently. Going forward, you are to avoid direct confrontations with students. If any future incidents arise, we expect you to follow the proper channels. We also recommend that you attend a conflict resolution workshop, so that you can better manage these situations in the future. Jamal nodded slowly, processing the information. It wasn't a complete victory, but it wasn't a loss either. He had kept his job. He still had a chance to teach. Thank you, Jamal said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. I'll follow the guidelines. But I still stand by what I did. The kids need to learn. The chairperson nodded. We understand, Mr. Jamal. And we appreciate your dedication. But we ask that you also consider the wider context. Your actions may have caused some students to feel uncomfortable. Please be mindful of that going forward. Jamal bit his lip, trying to control his anger. He had won, but it felt like a hollow victory. The school board had acknowledged the situation, but they had placed the blame squarely on his shoulders for causing discomfort. It felt unfair, but he couldn't let it derail him. With the meeting finally concluded, Jamal stood up to leave. He glanced one last time at Noah's mother, who was standing by the door, her arms crossed. She didn't look happy with the outcome, but she wasn't saying anything more. As Jamal walked out of the room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The fight wasn't over. The board had given him a chance, but now he had to walk a fine line. He had to prove that he could make a difference without stepping on anyone's toes. It was a heavy weight to carry. But Jamal wasn't about to back down. He had come this far, and he was determined to keep pushing forward. Later that day, as Jamal prepared for his next day of teaching, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. It wasn't just the apology from Noah's mother that he needed. It wasn't just the approval of the school board. There was something deeper, something more important. Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the lesson plan in front of him. He had taught lessons before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about reading from a book or going through a worksheet. It was about making a change. And deep down, Jamal knew that no matter what happened next, he wasn't going to stop fighting for what was right. As the days passed, things seemed to settle down. Jamal continued to teach, following the board's guidelines, trying to maintain a balance between being firm and fair. But there was one thing that kept nagging at him, the feeling that this was all leading to something bigger. He didn't know when or how, but Jamal was certain that soon, the truth would come to light. And when it did, he would be ready to face it head-on. Little did he know, the storm wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The days after the school board meeting felt like a strange balance between normalcy and tension. Jamal returned to his classroom as a substitute teacher, keeping his head low and following the new guidelines set by the school board. The students, though quiet and cautious around him, didn't show the same open hostility that they had before. Jamal could feel the difference, but it was almost as though the change was too forced, too polite. It wasn't the kind of change he had hoped for. As he prepared for the lessons each day, Jamal kept his focus on teaching the material. But there was always a part of him that was waiting for something to shift, waiting for the inevitable moment when things would escalate again. He wasn't naive enough to believe that things would just go back to normal, especially after what had happened with Noah and his group of friends. The students were still processing, and Jamal knew it. One afternoon, as Jamal walked through the hallways, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned to see Luke, the same boy who had been one of the ringleaders of the bullying, approaching him cautiously. "Mr. Jamal," Luke said, looking uneasy. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Jamal paused, his hand still on the door to the teacher's lounge. He was surprised that Luke was speaking to him at all, given everything that had happened. But he nodded and gestured for Luke to join him by the lockers. "What's up?" Jamal asked, keeping his tone neutral. Luke shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked down at the floor for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "I just wanted to say, well, I guess I wanted to apologize again. For what happened in your class. I know I wasn't the worst, but I didn't stop it. I was part of it." Jamal nodded, surprised at Luke's sincerity. "It's not just about saying sorry, Luke. It's about what you do next. Apologies are easy. It's actions that count." Luke looked up at him, his face filled with uncertainty. "I get that. I really do. But I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm trying, but I don't know how to fix what I did." Jamal thought for a moment. He didn't have all the answers, but he could see that Luke was genuinely trying to understand the impact of his actions. This wasn't the arrogant kid who had laughed at him just a few weeks ago. This was someone who was questioning everything, someone who realized that the behavior he had participated in wasn't just wrong, it was hurtful. "You're already doing the right thing by apologizing," Jamal said. "But you have to keep doing it. You have to be the example for others. You have to speak up when you see things that aren't right." Luke nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I'll try. I promise." Jamal watched him walk away, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that this wouldn't end in failure. Maybe some of these kids could change, with enough time and effort. Later that week, Jamal found himself standing in front of the class once again. The tension from before had faded somewhat, but the unease was still there. As he spoke to the students about the day's lesson, he noticed that Noah, sitting near the back of the class, was staring at him with a look that Jamal couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger or fear, it was something else. Something Jamal hadn't seen before. After class, as the students were packing up, Noah lingered behind. Jamal glanced over at him, his heart racing slightly. Was this going to be another confrontation? Another argument? Or maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity to have an honest conversation. Noah walked up to Jamal's desk slowly, his shoulders tense. "Mr. Jamal," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Jamal raised an eyebrow, surprised by the change in Noah's tone. "Sure, Noah. What's on your mind?" Noah hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. "I just wanted to apologize, for the way I acted. For what I said. I don't know what I was thinking, but it was wrong." Jamal could feel the weight of Noah's words, and for a moment, he was speechless. This wasn't the Noah he had seen just a few weeks ago, the Noah who had mocked him without hesitation. This was someone who was trying to make amends, who was acknowledging that he had hurt someone else. "You know, it's not just about saying sorry, Noah," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about showing that you've learned something. It's about being better moving forward." Noah nodded slowly, his eyes sincere. "I know. I'll do better. I promise." Jamal studied him for a moment. He could see the guilt in Noah's eyes, but he also saw something else. Maybe, just maybe, there was real remorse there. Maybe Noah was finally starting to understand the weight of his actions. "I hope you do," Jamal said softly. "But remember, actions speak louder than words." Noah didn't say anything else. He simply nodded and left the room. As Jamal watched him go, he felt a strange mixture of hope and wariness. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, the seeds of change had been planted. That night, Jamal couldn't sleep. His mind kept racing, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The confrontation with Noah, the apology from Luke, the support, or lack thereof, from the school board, it all felt like a whirlwind, a constant push and pull. He didn't know what was coming next, but he had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Jamal woke up to a message from the principal. It was short, but to the point. "Mr. Jamal, I need to speak with you today after school. Something has come up." Jamal's stomach twisted. What now? Had Noah's mother complained again? Or was it something worse? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all leading to something big, something that would push him even further into the storm. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, what would he do when it came time to face whatever was coming next? That afternoon, Jamal made his way to the principal's office. He had no idea what to expect, but as soon as he stepped inside, he knew that things were about to take another unexpected turn. The principal was sitting behind her desk, her face serious. She motioned for him to sit. "Mr. Jamal," she began, "I have some troubling news. I've just received a formal complaint from Noah's family. They're threatening legal action against the school unless you are removed from your position as a substitute teacher." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Legal action? What was she talking about? "They're claiming that your actions in the classroom were not only unprofessional but discriminatory," the principal continued. "They've hired a lawyer, and they're demanding a full investigation into the matter." Jamal's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Was he about to lose everything he had worked for? The very idea of it felt surreal. The principal sighed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jamal, but this is out of my hands. The school board will have to decide what happens next. You'll be notified as soon as they make their decision." Jamal sat there in stunned silence. What was happening to him? And how far was Noah's family willing to go to make sure he paid for what had happened? The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Jamal sat in the principal's office, trying to process the words that had just been spoken. Legal action. Noah's family had taken things to a whole new level, and now his future was uncertain. He had hoped the storm would pass, that things would settle down, but it was clear now that this was far from over. The principal watched him carefully, waiting for his reaction. Jamal could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He had never imagined that standing up for himself in a classroom would lead to something like this. "Mr. Jamal," the principal said, her voice soft but firm, "I want to make it clear that I'm on your side. I understand what you were trying to do. But the board and the parents, they don't see it the same way." Jamal nodded slowly, his thoughts spinning. "I know. I just don't understand how it got this far. I'm just trying to teach these kids to be better, to understand what's right. And now, it feels like everything is falling apart." The principal leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but resolute. "I know it's hard. But I need you to keep your head up. The board will make their decision soon, and we'll see where things go from there. Just don't give up yet." Jamal stood up, trying to steady his nerves. "Thank you," he said, though he didn't feel much gratitude. He wasn't sure what to feel anymore. "I'll do my best." As he left the office, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Legal threats, board meetings, angry parents. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself when he first decided to become a teacher. The next few days were a blur of stress and uncertainty. Jamal continued to teach, going through the motions while his mind was consumed with worry. He knew that he had to maintain professionalism, that he had to show the board and the parents that he could still do his job. But it was hard. The weight of the situation hung over him like a cloud, and the students could feel it. Noah, Luke, Ava, and Caitlin were quieter than usual, and Jamal couldn't tell if it was out of guilt, fear, or just discomfort. Their eyes lingered on him in class, but no one said much. It wasn't the kind of peace he had hoped for. It felt more like a simmering tension waiting to erupt. One afternoon, as Jamal was walking down the hall, he was stopped by the school counselor, Ms. Peterson. She had been one of the few adults at the school who had expressed support for him from the beginning. She was tall and calm, with kind eyes and a quiet strength that made her a comforting presence. "Jamal, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "Of course," Jamal said, following her to a quieter corner of the hall. "I just wanted to check in on you," Ms. Peterson began, her face filled with concern. "I know things have been difficult lately. How are you holding up?" Jamal sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I'm trying to stay focused, but it's hard when I don't know what's going to happen next. The board's meeting soon, and I don't know what they'll decide. I've been working so hard, and now, I don't know if it's all going to fall apart. Ms. Peterson nodded sympathetically. I get it. I've been hearing about the legal action Noah's family is threatening. I want you to know that I'm on your side. You're not alone in this. Jamal looked at her, his heart heavy. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. But I don't know how much support will help. It feels like the odds are stacked against me. You're right, she said quietly. But what you're doing is important. You're standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. That matters. It's going to be hard, but I think you've made a bigger impact than you realize. The kids may not show it yet, but they're learning from you. Jamal nodded, trying to absorb her words. He knew she was right. He had to keep going. He had to stay strong, even if everything felt like it was unraveling. But it didn't make it any easier. Later that week, Jamal received an official letter from the school board. It was the moment he had been dreading. As he opened the envelope, he read through the contents, his heart pounding in his chest. The letter stated that the board had decided to uphold Noah's family's complaint and was placing him on a probationary period. He was to attend sensitivity training, and if any further incidents occurred, he would be removed from his position permanently. The board had also requested that he meet with a mediator to discuss his conduct. Jamal's hands trembled as he set the letter down on his desk. The message was clear: they were giving him a second chance, but only under very strict conditions. If he stepped out of line again, he was out. His mind spun as he thought about everything that had led up to this point. All the effort, all the frustration, all the moments of hope and doubt, it all felt like it had led to this, a probationary period. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a complete defeat either. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to process everything. He wasn't sure how he felt about the board's decision, but one thing was clear: he couldn't back down now. Not after everything he had fought for. The next day, as he entered the classroom, he was met with the same uneasy silence from the students. But there was something different in the air, something heavy, as though everyone was waiting for the next move. Jamal stood at the front of the room, looking out at their faces. He had a decision to make. Would he let this defeat him? Or would he continue to stand up, to push for the change he knew was needed? As he began the lesson, he noticed Noah sitting in the back, his face unreadable. But Jamal wasn't going to let that bother him anymore. He had a responsibility, not just to Noah, but to all of them. Jamal would keep teaching. He would keep fighting. He would be the change he wanted to see. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jamal knew that he couldn't stop now. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The days following the board's decision were tense for Jamal. He had been placed on probation, but he was determined to prove himself. He didn't let the ruling define him. He had a mission, and he wasn't going to back down now. His classroom had become a battleground, not just for knowledge, but for respect. And while it wasn't easy, he knew that the fight was necessary. The first day back after receiving the letter from the board felt different. There was an unusual stillness in the classroom, a silence that seemed to linger as Jamal entered. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he stood at the front of the class, facing his students. They knew about the probationary period. They knew the stakes. Jamal couldn't ignore the sense of discomfort that radiated from some of the students, especially Noah and his friends. But he wasn't going to let their discomfort stop him from doing his job. He cleared his throat and began the lesson. All right, everyone, let's get started. We'll begin with Chapter 7. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll work through it together. The students didn't immediately respond. Jamal could tell that many of them were still processing what had happened, still unsure of how to act around him. But he pressed on, doing his best to keep the class engaged. It wasn't the same as before. The energy had shifted. The playful banter that had once filled the room now felt awkward and forced, like everyone was walking on eggshells. Luke, sitting near the front, seemed particularly restless. He shifted in his seat, glancing over at Jamal and then quickly looking away. Jamal could sense that he was still trying to figure out where he stood. Noah, on the other hand, was completely silent, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His usual defiance was gone, replaced by a strange, uncomfortable stillness. Jamal couldn't let that distract him though. He had a job to do, and he had to do it well, regardless of the atmosphere in the room. As he continued with the lesson, he focused on the material, guiding the students through it, even if it felt like he was forcing normalcy in a situation that wasn't. It was during a break in the lesson that something unexpected happened. Noah, who had been silent all morning, suddenly stood up and walked to Jamal's desk. The room fell silent, every student watching closely. Jamal couldn't help but notice the way Noah's body language had changed. Gone was the arrogance, the cocky demeanor. Instead, there was something else, something that resembled fear. Jamal looked at him, waiting for him to speak. After a long moment, Noah opened his mouth, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Jamal, I wanted to apologize again. For everything." Jamal blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. This wasn't the Noah he had confronted before, the one who had insulted him without hesitation. This was a Noah who seemed broken, unsure of himself, almost regretful. "I don't know what I was thinking before," Noah continued, his eyes downcast. "I was just trying to fit in, but that's no excuse. I hurt you, and I'm sorry." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Jamal felt a knot form in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't sure what to say. It was a simple apology, but it felt like a turning point. It wasn't enough to fix everything that had happened, but it was a step in the right direction. Jamal took a deep breath and looked Noah in the eyes. "Thank you for saying that," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But Noah, this isn't just about an apology. You need to show that you've learned something. You need to be better, not just for me, but for everyone." Noah nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I know. I will. I promise." The bell rang shortly after, signaling the end of class. Noah didn't say anything more, but the apology had been made, and Jamal couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to change. The rest of the day passed in a strange silence. Jamal noticed that the students seemed more reserved, more hesitant to engage in their usual banter. It was as though the events of the past few weeks had forced everyone to take a step back and think about their actions. It was uncomfortable, but in some ways, it was exactly what needed to happen. When the last bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Jamal gathered his things and headed for the teacher's lounge. He was exhausted. The weight of the probationary period, the pressure to prove himself, the student's strange behavior, it was all starting to take its toll. But as he entered the lounge, he found himself face to face with Ms. Peterson again. She was sitting at a table, flipping through some papers, but when she saw Jamal walk in, she smiled and waved him over. "Hey, how did it go today?" she asked, her voice warm and comforting. Jamal sighed and sat down across from her. "It was strange," he admitted. "The kids are being cautious. It's like they don't know how to act around me anymore." Noah apologized, though. That was unexpected. Ms. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "That's a good sign. It sounds like some progress is being made." Jamal nodded. "Yeah, but it's not enough. I'm still on probation. And now, with the legal threats hanging over my head, I don't know how long I'll be able to keep teaching here." Ms. Peterson frowned, but her expression softened. "I know it's tough, Jamal. But don't let the fear of what might happen stop you from doing the right thing. You've already made a huge impact. You're teaching those kids something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. You're showing them what it means to be accountable for their actions. That matters." Jamal smiled, feeling a flicker of gratitude. "Thanks, Ms. Peterson. I needed to hear that." She nodded, her gaze warm. "You've got this. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself." Jamal left the lounge that day feeling a little lighter. It wasn't much, but it was something. The days ahead were still uncertain, and the legal threats loomed over him like a dark cloud, but at least he knew he wasn't alone in this. He had people who believed in him, and he had the strength to keep going. As Jamal walked down the hallway to leave the school, he felt a sense of determination wash over him. The battle wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until he saw real change in those students, until they understood the consequences of their actions and took responsibility for them. And he was willing to fight for that, no matter what. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, but Jamal knew one thing for sure: he wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The fight for respect and understanding had only just begun. The weeks dragged on, each day feeling like a careful balancing act. Jamal found himself walking a fine line, between being the teacher he knew he could be and navigating the lingering tension that still hung over his classroom. Despite the apology from Noah, Despite the support from Ms. Peterson, the weight of the situation was always there, pressing down on him. Jamal was still on probation, still under the watchful eyes of the school board and the parents who had raised their voices against him. Every day he entered that classroom, he knew that any misstep could cost him his job. The thought gnawed at him constantly, making even the smallest decisions feel fraught with importance. But there were moments, fleeting though they were, when Jamal could see the students beginning to change. It wasn't all about him, it was about them too. They were the ones who had to confront their own biases, their own ignorance. They were the ones who needed to learn how to treat others with respect, not just when it was convenient, but all the time. One afternoon, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. It happened during a simple group activity, a discussion about current events. Jamal had asked his students to pair up and discuss a news story that dealt with racism in some form. He watched as the students shuffled into their groups, hesitant but eager to participate. As he walked between the desks, checking in with the groups, Jamal stopped by Noah's group. Noah was sitting next to Luke and Caitlin, both of whom looked awkward, unsure of how to proceed with the activity. Jamal noticed the way they glanced at him and then at each other, clearly still unsure of how to act around him. But then he heard Noah speak, and it was something he hadn't expected. I think we don't really understand what racism is, Noah said, his voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. I mean, we hear about it, but we don't really get it. It's not just about calling someone names. It's about power, right? It's about making people feel like they don't matter. Jamal stood frozen for a moment, his heart racing. Had Noah just acknowledged the truth? Had he, for the first time, understood what it meant to be on the receiving end of hate? He looked at Luke and Caitlin, who nodded in agreement, their faces thoughtful. Yeah, Luke added quietly. I guess I never thought about it that way. We just think it's about being mean, but it's a lot more than that. Jamal smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This wasn't a moment of perfection. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a start. They were finally beginning to see, to understand, to grapple with the reality of the world beyond their sheltered experiences. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment. The students filed out of the room, still in a bit of a daze from the discussion, but Jamal couldn't help but feel hopeful. This was progress, slow, difficult progress, but progress nonetheless. However, just as Jamal was about to leave for the day, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ms. Peterson. Jamal, I need to talk to you. Something's come up. Can you meet me after school? His stomach dropped. What now? Was this more trouble? He had just started to feel like he was getting through to the students, and now something else was on the horizon. But he knew he had no choice. He had to find out what it was. Later that afternoon, Jamal met Ms. Peterson in the teacher's lounge. She looked serious, her brow furrowed as she sat at the table, flipping through some papers. Jamal, I've been hearing some unsettling things, Ms. Peterson said, her voice low. Noah's parents have reached out again. They're not happy with how their son's been responding to the class, and they've filed another complaint. This time, they're demanding a meeting with the principal. Jamal's heart sank. He had been hoping that things would settle, that the apology from Noah was a sign of real change, but this news sent a chill through him. What are they saying? Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice steady. They're claiming that the class discussion today made Noah feel uncomfortable. They say you're pushing your own agenda on the students, and they're demanding that you be removed from the classroom. They're accusing you of indoctrinating the kids, of making them think a certain way about race, Ms. Peterson explained, her voice tinged with frustration. Jamal shook his head, disbelief and anger flooding through him. Indoctrinating? I'm teaching them to think for themselves, to understand the world they live in. But now this? Again. Ms. Peterson nodded, her expression sympathetic. I know, Jamal. But you need to be prepared. The principal is going to set up a meeting with them, and they're demanding that you be present. They want answers. Jamal's mind was spinning. This couldn't be happening. After everything he had worked for, after the progress he had made with the students, was this how it was going to end? I can't keep doing this, he muttered to himself. I can't keep fighting this battle every day. Ms. Peterson placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. You don't have to do it alone. I'll be there with you. You have people on your side, Jamal. Don't forget that. He nodded, trying to push back the wave of frustration threatening to overwhelm him. The fight was far from over. The legal threats, the pressure from the parents, It all weighed heavily on him. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't back down now. The next day, Jamal sat in the principal's office, waiting for the meeting to begin. His hands were clammy, his thoughts racing, but he forced himself to sit still. Ms. Peterson had arrived early and sat next to him, her presence a source of comfort. The door opened, and Noah's parents walked in. Their faces were tight with anger, their expressions cold. Noah's mother, in particular, looked as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The principal nodded to everyone and motioned for the meeting to begin. "Thank you all for coming today. We're here to discuss the recent complaints that have been filed regarding Mr. Jamal's conduct in the classroom." Jamal tried to keep his voice steady as he spoke. "I'm not here to push any agenda. I'm here to teach, to help these students understand the world they live in. And if that means having difficult conversations about race, then I'm going to do it." Noah's mother cut him off, her voice sharp. "You are making my son uncomfortable. You're confusing him with these discussions. You're making him question everything he's been taught. This is not the place for such conversations." Jamal's pulse quickened, but he kept his calm. "I'm not making him question everything, Mrs. Thompson. I'm encouraging him to think critically, to understand the world from more than one perspective." Noah's father, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You're crossing a line. We won't stand by and let you turn our son into someone he's not." The tension in the room was thick, but Jamal wasn't backing down. He had come too far to let this be the end. As the meeting continued, it became clear that the Thompsons weren't backing down either. But Jamal knew that this wasn't just about his job anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about teaching these students to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. The battle wasn't over yet. And Jamal was ready to keep fighting. The meeting with Noah's parents had been a turning point. Jamal had walked out of the principal's office that day with a strange mixture of frustration and determination. The Thompsons were relentless in their demands, their accusations hitting him harder than he had expected. But as the days passed, something inside him hardened. This wasn't just about his job anymore. It was about something far greater, about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. The legal threats, the pressure from Noah's family, the constant scrutiny, it all felt like a weight he couldn't shake. But Jamal knew he couldn't let them win. He had made a promise to his students, a promise that he would teach them more than just facts and figures. He would teach them how to think critically, how to face the uncomfortable truths of the world, and how to stand up for others when it mattered most. That week, Jamal was more focused than ever. He worked late into the evening, preparing his lessons with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let this defeat him. The Thompsons couldn't control the way he taught, and they couldn't control his passion for educating his students. As he entered the classroom the next day, Jamal could feel the tension in the air. The students were quiet, watching him closely. There was still that uncomfortable silence, but it wasn't the same as before. They had seen him fight back, and now they were waiting to see what would happen next. Jamal took a deep breath, standing at the front of the room. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice steady. "Today, we're going to talk about history. Not just the dates and events in your textbooks, but the real story, the parts that aren't always told. And we're going to do it together." The students glanced at each other, uncertain but intrigued. It wasn't just a regular lesson. Jamal could feel it in the air. He had an opportunity to teach them something important, something that could help them understand the world in a way they hadn't before. He started by asking the students to think about a time when they had witnessed something unfair. He didn't give them a prompt or a specific direction. He simply wanted them to think about their own experiences. At first, the room was filled with silence. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others stared at the floor, but no one spoke. And then, out of nowhere, Noah raised his hand. Jamal was taken aback, but he gestured for Noah to speak. I remember a time when I saw a kid get picked on just because of where he was from," Noah said quietly. "It wasn't even a big deal to me, but I could see how much it hurt him. It wasn't right." The room grew quiet as Noah's words hung in the air. Jamal couldn't believe it. This was the same Noah who had mocked him just weeks ago, and now he was speaking out about something he had seen, something he had felt. "Thank you, Noah," Jamal said, his voice soft but sincere. "That's a powerful example. Sometimes we see things happening, and we don't realize the impact it's having. But when we do, when we see that something is wrong, we have a choice. We can either turn away or stand up." Luke, who had been sitting silently beside Noah, spoke up next. I get it now, he said. It's not just about the obvious stuff. It's the little things, too. It's about how we treat people every day. Jamal nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He had spent so much time wondering if any of this was sinking in, if any of the students were actually learning something from these lessons. And now, he had proof. The change was happening, slowly but surely. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. The students gathered their things, but this time, there was no rush to leave. They lingered in their seats, exchanging glances, as if they were processing what had just happened. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment. He had made a difference. But just as he was about to gather his materials and leave for the day, a familiar figure stepped into the doorway. It was the principal, her expression somber. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. What now? Mr. Jamal, can I speak with you for a moment? The principal asked, her tone serious but not unfriendly. Jamal followed her out into the hallway, his mind racing. Had something happened with the Thompsons? Was this the end of the line for him? Jamal, the principal began, I've just received word from the school board. They've made their decision regarding the complaints and the legal threats. Jamal felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been bracing for this moment, but hearing it out loud still hit him like a punch to the gut. They've decided that the probationary period will remain in place, the principal continued, her voice measured. However, they also acknowledge the progress you've made in your classroom. They've agreed to lift the legal threat, provided that you continue to follow the guidelines set forth in your probation. Jamal's mind raced. So I'm not fired? No, the principal replied, shaking her head. You're not fired. But the board has made it clear that they expect you to continue following the expectations laid out for you. There will be regular reviews, and any further incidents will result in immediate termination. Jamal's heart settled slightly, but the pressure was still there. He wasn't free from the threat of losing his job, but at least for now, he had been given another chance. Thank you, Jamal said, his voice hoarse. I'll continue to follow the guidelines. I want to make this work. The principal gave him a small smile. I know you do. And I'm here to support you. Just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll get through this. As Jamal walked back to his classroom, the weight of the decision lingered in the air. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step forward. He had proven that he could teach the lessons that mattered, that he could push past the barriers others had set for him. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Jamal knew that the Real challenge was still ahead. He had made it this far, but he had to continue to prove himself, not just to the board, but to his students, to Noah, to everyone. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Chapter 10. The last chapter will conclude the journey, but it will take time to get there. The days after Jamal received the news from the school board were a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. On one hand, he had been given a second chance, a chance to continue teaching, a chance to make a difference. On the other hand, the pressure was higher than ever. The expectations were clear. He had to continue proving himself. One wrong move, one slip-up, and it could all come crashing down. As the weeks passed, Jamal worked tirelessly to maintain his focus. The probationary period loomed over him, but he wasn't going to let it define his actions. He continued teaching with passion, determined to show his students that he wasn't just there to follow the rules, but to make a lasting impact on their lives. Noah, Luke, Caitlin, and the rest of the class were still adjusting, still grappling with the lessons Jamal had been teaching. The conversations about racism, respect, and accountability had become a regular part of their classroom discussions. The change was gradual, but Jamal could see the subtle shift in their attitudes. They were beginning to understand, beginning to question, beginning to see the world with a wider lens. It wasn't just about the classroom anymore. Jamal had noticed small acts of kindness between the students, Noah helping Luke with a math problem, Caitlin speaking up when she saw someone being excluded during lunch, Luke making an effort to include others in group activities. These were small victories, but they were victories nonetheless. One day, after a particularly intense class discussion about systemic racism and its impact on society, Jamal noticed a shift in the room. The students, though tired and worn out from the topic, seemed more engaged than they had ever been. They asked questions, shared their thoughts, and even challenged one another in a respectful way. Jamal could feel the difference in the atmosphere. This was what he had been hoping for all along. This was why he had fought so hard to stay in this classroom, to see his students not just learning from a textbook, but learning how to think for themselves. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Jamal noticed Noah lingering at his desk. This was a common sight these days. Noah had become more comfortable with Jamal, more willing to stay after class and ask questions. "Mr. Jamal," Noah began, his voice quieter than usual. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Sure, Noah. What's on your mind?" Noah hesitated for a moment, glancing around the classroom as if unsure whether to speak. Finally, he looked Jamal in the eye. "I just wanted to thank you. For everything. I didn't realize how much I needed to learn, about everything." Jamal was taken aback. He had expected the usual excuses, the quick apology, but this was different. This was a moment of real understanding. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've been talking about in class," Noah continued. "About racism and what it really means. I didn't get it before. I mean, I knew about it, but I didn't understand it. Not the way I do now." Jamal smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "It's not easy, Noah. And it's not something you just figure out overnight. But you're doing the work. That's what matters." Noah nodded. "Yeah, but I wouldn't have gotten it if you hadn't made us face it. If you hadn't pushed us to really think about it, even when it was uncomfortable. I know I messed up, and I know I still have a lot to learn, but I'm trying." Jamal placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "That's all anyone can do. Just keep trying. You'll get there. And so will the others." Noah smiled, his usual arrogance replaced with something much more genuine. "Thanks, Mr. Jamal. I won't forget this." As Noah left the room, Jamal stood at the front, watching him go. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but more importantly, he felt hope. This wasn't just about teaching facts or filling in the blanks on a test. This was about teaching his students how to be better people. And for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt like he was succeeding. The rest of the semester passed in a blur of lessons, discussions, and small but significant changes. Jamal continued to fight the lingering battles with the board, attending sensitivity training and ensuring that he stayed within the guidelines set for him. The Thompsons had backed off for the time being, their threats becoming more distant as the school year came to a close. Jamal knew that he had come a long way, but the truth was that he still had a long road ahead. When graduation day arrived, Jamal stood in the back of the auditorium, watching his students file onto the stage to receive their diplomas. He felt a lump form in his throat as he saw Noah, Luke, and Caitlin standing together with the rest of their classmates. They had made it. And Jamal had played a part in helping them get there. He had helped them learn not just how to pass a test, but how to be more compassionate, more understanding, and more aware of the world around them. As the ceremony ended, Jamal found himself standing by the exit, watching the students celebrate with their families. It was a bittersweet moment. He had done everything he could to make a difference, and now it was time to let go. The students were ready to move on, to take the lessons they had learned and apply them to the real world. Jamal had done his job, and in many ways, that felt like the biggest victory of all. Noah walked up to him, a big grin on his face. "Mr. Jamal, we did it. We really did it." Jamal smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "You did it, Noah. All of you did. I'm proud of you." Noah nodded, his eyes sincere. "Thanks for everything. I'll never forget what you taught me." Jamal watched as Noah and the others walked off, ready to face the next chapter of their lives. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The battle had been hard, and at times, it had felt like everything was against him. But now, as he watched his students move forward, Jamal knew that the fight had been worth it. The fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future, about helping his students understand the world and their place in it. Jamal had done what he set out to do. He had made a difference. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt confident that whatever came next, he would face it with the same strength and determination that had carried him this far. And with that, Jamal walked out of the school, ready for whatever the next chapter of his life would bring.